Tramway Engines by the Reverend W. Awdry. Read and adapted by Joshua Boston. Ghost Train. And every year on the date of the accident, it runs again as a warning to others, plunging into the gap, shrieking like a lost soul. Percy, what are you talking about? The ghost train. Driver saw it last night. Where? Asked Thomas and Toby together. He didn't say, but it must have been on our line. Oh, it makes my wheels wobble to think of it. Puh, said Thomas. You're just a silly little engine, Percy. I'm not scared. Thomas didn't believe in your ghost, said Percy the next morning. His driver laughed. Neither do I. It was only a pretend ghost story on television. Percy was disappointed, but he was too busy all day with his stone cars to think about ghosts. That evening he came back light engine from the harbor. He liked running at night. He coasted along without effort. The rails hummed underneath his wheels, and the signal lights changed to green at his approach. Percy knew where he was, even in the dark. Crow's Farm Crossing, he chundered happily. We shan't be long now. But he had reckoned without Sam the farmer. Sam had forgotten that Mr. Crow wanted a load of lime taken to a 40-acre field. When he remembered, it was nearly dark. He drove in a hurry, bumped over the crossing, and sank his cart's front wheels in mud at the field gate. The horse tried hard, but couldn't move it. The cart's tail still fouled the railway. Sam gave it up. He unharnessed the horse and rode back to the farm for help. There's still time, he told himself. The next train isn't due for an hour. But Sam had reckoned without Percy. Percy broke the cart to smithereens. Lime flew everywhere. They found no one at the crossing, so they puffed quickly to the nearest signal box. Hello, said the signalman. What have you done to Percy? He's white all over. Percy's driver explained what had happened. I'll see to it, said the signalman. But you'd better clean Percy, or people will think he is a ghost. Percy chuckled. Do let's pretend that I'm a ghost and scare Thomas. That'll teach him to say I'm a silly little engine. On their way, they met Toby, who promised to help. Thomas was being oiled up for his evening train when Toby hurried in. Percy's had an accident, he cried. Poor engine, said Thomas. Botheration. That means I'll be late. They've cleared the line for you, Toby went on, but there's something worse. Out with it, Toby, interrupted Thomas. I can't wait all evening. I've just seen something, said Toby in a shaky voice. It looked like Percy's ghost. It said it was coming out to warn us. Who cares? Don't be frightened, Toby. I'll take care of you. Percy approached the shed quietly and glided through it. Peep, 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 he shrieked. As had been arranged, Toby's driver and fireman quickly shut the doors. Let me in, wailed Percy in a spooky voice. No, no, answered Toby. Not by the smoke of my chimney, chim, chim. Then I'll chuff, and I'll puff, and I'll break your door in. Oh, dear, exclaimed Thomas. It's getting late. Oh, I had no idea. Oh, I must find Annie and Clarabelle. And he hurried out the other way. Percy was none the worse for his adventure and was still enjoying himself enormously. He was soon cleaned, but Thomas never came back. It was morning when he finally returned. Where have you been? Asked Toby. Well, said Thomas, I knew you'd be sad about Percy, and I didn't like to intrude. I slept in the freight shed and... Oh, sorry, can't stop. Gotta see a coach about a train. And he shot off like a jackrabbit. Percy rolled up alongside. He had heard everything. Well, 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 he exclaimed. What do you know about that? Anyone would think, chuckled Toby, that our Thomas had just seen a ghost. Woolly Bear. In the summer, gangers cut the long grass along the tracks and cock it. Sir Topham Hatt sells the hay to the hill farmers who want winter feed for their stock. At this time of year, when he comes back from the harbor, Percy stops where they have been cutting. The men load up his empty wagons, and he pulls them to the station. Toby then takes them to the hills. The farmers collect the hay from Toby's top station. While in the wagons, the hay is covered up to keep it from blowing about, but on the line side, it is stacked in the open air to dry. Wheesh! Percy gave his ghostly whistle. "Don't be frightened, Thomas," he laughed. "It's only me." "Your ugly phiz is enough to frighten anyone," said Thomas. "You're like, ugly indeed. I'm a green caterpillar with red stripes," continued Thomas firmly. "You crawl like one, too." "I don't." "Who's been late every afternoon this week?" "It's the hay." "I can't help that," said Thomas. "Time's time, and Sir Topham Hatt is relying on me to keep it. I can't with you crawling around the hay till all hours." "Green caterpillar indeed," fumed Percy, as he set off to collect some hay to take to the harbor. "Everyone says I'm handsome, or at least nearly everyone. Anyway, my curves are much better than Thomas's corners." Percy then spent the morning shunting in the harbor yards. "Thomas says I'm always late," he grumbled. "I'm never late. For at least only a few minutes. What's that to Thomas? He can always make up time for the run." But all the same, he and his driver decided to start off home early. It was most unfortunate that just as they did, a crate of treacle was upset all over Percy. Percy was cross. They wiped the worst off, but he was still sticky when he puffed away. The wind rose as they puffed along. Soon it was blowing a gale. "Look at that!" exclaimed his driver. The wind caught the piled hay, tossing it up and over the track. The gangers tried to clear it, but more always came. The line climbed here. "Take a run at it, Percy," his driver advised. So whistling warningly, Percy quickly gathered speed, but the hay made the rail slippery and his wheels wouldn't grip. Time after time, he stalled with spinning wheels and had to wait till the line ahead was cleared before he could start again. At the station, everyone was waiting. The signalman climbed a telegraph pole, the station master paced the platform, passengers fussed, and Thomas seethed impatiently. 10 minutes late! I warned him! Passengers will complain, and Sir Topham Hatt... The signalman suddenly shouted. The station master stood amazed, and the passengers exclaimed and laughed as Percy approached. "Sorry I'm late," he panted. "So I should hope," scolded Thomas, but he spoiled the effect as Percy drew alongside. "Look what's crawled out of the hay," he chortled. "What's wrong?" asked Percy. "Talk about hairy caterpillars," puffed Thomas as he started away. "It's worth being late to have seen you." When Percy got home, his driver showed him what he looked like in a mirror. "Bust my buffers!" he exclaimed. "No wonder they all laughed at me. I'm just like a woolly bear. Please clean me before Toby comes." But it was no good. Thomas told Toby all about it. Instead of talking about sensible things like playing ghosts, Thomas and Toby made jokes about woolly bear caterpillars and other things which crawl around in hay. They laughed a lot, but Percy thought they were really being very silly indeed. Mavis. Mavis is a diesel engine belonging to the quarry company on Thomas's line. They bought her to shun freight cars in their sidings. She is painted black and has 6 small wheels hidden by side plates just like Toby's. Mavis is young and full of her own ideas. She is sure they are better than anybody else's. She loves rearranging things too, and began putting Toby's cars in different places every day. This made Toby cross. "Freight cars," he grumbled, "should be where you want them, when you want them."
"Fudge and fiddlesticks,"
said Mavis and flounced away. At last, Toby lost patience. "I can't waste time playing hunt the cars with you. Take them yourself," he snapped. Mavis was delighted. Taking freight cars made her feel important. At the station, she met Daisy.
"Toby's an old fusspot,"
she complained. Daisy liked Toby, but was always happy to have another diesel to talk to.
"Steam engines have their uses, but they just don't understand,"
she said.
"Toby says that only steam engines can manage freight cars properly."
"Much rubbish,"
put in Daisy.
"Depend upon it, my dear Mavis. Anything that steam engines can do, we diesels can do better."
Daisy knew nothing about freight cars, but Mavis didn't realize this. Toby's line crosses the main road behind the station and for a short way follows a farm lane. The rails here are buried in earth and ashes almost to their tops. In wet weather, animals, carts, and tractors make the lane muddy and slippery. Frosty weather makes the mud rock hard. It swells it too, preventing an engine from gripping the rails properly. Toby always found this place troublesome. He stops before reaching the lane. His fireman then halts the traffic at the crossing and then he sets off again. By using the heavy cars to push him along, he has no trouble with the frosty rails in the lane and across the road. It is the only safe thing to do in this kind of weather. One day, when frost came to the island of Sodor, Toby warned Mavis and told her just what to do.
"I can manage, thank you,"
she replied cheekily.
"I'm not an old fusspot like you."
The freight cars were tired of being pushed around by Mavis. "It's slippery," they whispered. "Let's push her around instead." On, they yelled as they reached the stopboard. But Mavis had heard about Percy and took no chances. She brought them carefully down to the lane and stopped at the level crossing. There, a second man halted the traffic while the conductor unpinned the wagon brakes.
"One in the headlamp for Fusspot Toby,"
she chortled. She looked forward to having a good giggle about it with Daisy. But Mavis never got her giggle. She was so sure she was right that she had stopped in the wrong place. When Toby stops before the lane in frosty weather, some of his cars are still on the slope. This ensures that they can't hold him back, and their weight helps him forward till his wheels can grip again. But instead of taking Toby's advice, Mavis had given the cars the chance they wanted. "Hold back! Hold back!" they giggled.
"Grrr up!"
ordered Mavis. But the cars just laughed and her wheels spun helplessly. She tried backing, but the same thing happened. They tried sanding the rails and digging away the frozen mud, but they only broke the shovel spades. Cars and lorries tooted impatiently.
"Grrr!"
wailed Mavis in hopeless fury. Toby was in the yard when he heard the news. "I warned her," he fumed. "I told her just where to stop. I can manage, she said, and called me an old fusspot." "She's young yet," soothed his driver, "and—" "She can manage her cars herself," interrupted Toby. "They're your cars, really," his driver pointed out. "Mavis isn't supposed to come down here. She's supposed to stay at the quarry. If Sir Topham Hatt finds out—" "You wouldn't tell, would you?" "Of course not." "Well then." "But," his driver went on, "if we don't help clear the line, he'll soon know all about it. And so shall we." Yes," said Toby thoughtfully. He and his driver agreed it would be best to help Mavis after all. An angry farmer was telling Mavis just what she could do with her train when Toby arrived and buffered up to her. "Having trouble, Mavis?" he chortled. "I am surprised."
"Gross!"
said Mavis. With much puffing and wheel slip, Toby pushed the freight cars back. Mavis hardly helped at all. The hard work made Toby's fire burn fiercely. He then reversed, stopping in intervals, while his firemen spread hot cinders to melt the frozen mud. At last they finished and reached the crossing. "Goodbye," called Toby. "You're all managed now, I expect." Mavis didn't answer. She took the cars to the sheds and scuttled home to the quarry as quickly as she could. Toby's tightrope. When the manager found out what had happened, He scolded Mavis severely. "You are a very naughty engine. You have no business to go jauntering down Toby's line instead of doing your work up here,"
It's that Toby,
protested Mavis.
He's a fusspot.
"Toby has forgotten more about cars than you will ever know. You will put the cars where he wants them and nowhere else."
But
"There are no buts," said the manager sternly. "You will do as you are told, or else." Mavis stayed good for several days. A couple of weeks later, Percy came by to collect some stone from the quarry. Snow and frost lay everywhere. There was not a sound to be heard. Percy ventured further. He found Mavis resting in the shelter of some rocks. "Cheer up, Mavis," he whistled. But Mavis was still remembering the trouble she had had with the cars.
manager says I don't listen to advice. He says I have no business jauntering down Toby's line. Toby's a fusspot.
"Toby knows a lot more about cars than you do," replied Percy. "So you have to put the cars where he wants them. Then you'll be a really useful engine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to take these stones to the harbor. Good day." Mavis liked Percy, but she still didn't want to listen to his advice. And soon, she got tired of being good.
Why shouldn't I go on Toby's line?
She grumbled. She started making plans. At the top station, the siding arrangements were awkward. To put the freight cars where Toby wanted them, Mavis had to make several journeys and go backwards and forwards, taking only a few at a time.
If we use the teeniest bit of Toby's line,
She suggested to her driver.
we could save all this bother.
Her driver, unsuspicious, spoke to the manager, who allowed them to go as far as the first level crossing. Mavis chuckled, but she kept it to herself. Frost hindered work in the quarry, but a few days later, the weather changed. As the snow melted, it grew busy again. More freight cars than ever were needed. Some trains were so long, in fact, that before leaving the cars for Toby, Mavis had to go beyond the level crossing with them. This gave her ideas and a chance to go further down the line without it seeming her fault.
Can you keep a secret?
She asked the freight cars one day. "Yes, yes, yes," they chattered.
Will you bump me at the level crossing and tell no one I asked you?
The cars were delighted and promised. It was most unfortunate that Toby soon arrived while Mavis was elsewhere and decided to shunt them himself. The cars decided to bump him anyway. They reached the level crossing and Toby's brakes came on. This was the signal for the freight cars. "On, on, on!" they yelled, giving him a fearful bump. His driver and fireman, caught unawares, were knocked over in the cab, and before they could pick themselves up, Toby was away with the cars screaming and yelling behind him. No one realized that, with the warmer weather, melted snow from the mountains had turned a quiet stream ahead into a raging torrent, and the bridge ahead was about to collapse. The supports had just been undermined. Toby and his crew saw it together. The bridge vanished before their eyes, and the rails were now like a tightrope stretching across the thundering water. "Beep, beep, beep," whistled Toby. "Stop! Stop!" His driver, still dazed, fought for control. He shut the regulator, turned the reverser hard over, and pushed full steam against the cars. "Hold them, boy! Hold them! It's up to you now!" Nearer and nearer they came to the bridge. Toby whistled despairingly. Though their speed was reduced, braking was still risky. But it was all or nothing now. The driver braked hard. Toby went into a squealing slide, groaned fearfully, and stopped. Still on the rails, but his wheels were now treading the tightrope over the abyss. Mavis was horrified. She brought some workmen who anchored Toby with ropes while she pulled the freight cars away. Then she ran quickly back to the rescue. Ropes were fastened between the two engines. Toby still had steam and was able to help. Soon he was safe on firm track and saying thank you to Mavis.
I'm sorry about the cars,
said Mavis.
I can't think how you managed to stop them in time.
"Oh well," said Toby. "My drivers told me about circus people who walk tight ropes. I just didn't fancy doing it myself." Later, Sir Topham had arrived. He thanked the manager and the men for rescuing Toby from his tightrope. "A very smart piece of work," he said. "Mavis did well too, I hear." Mavis looked ashamed.
It's my fault about those cars, sir.
She faltered.
I didn't know, but if I could
"Could what?" smiled Sir Topham Hatt.
come down the line sometime, sir? Toby says he'll show me how to go on and what to do.
"Certainly," replied Sir Topham Hatt, "if your manager agrees." And so it was arranged. Mavis is now a welcome visitor at the sheds. She is still young and still makes mistakes, but she's never too proud to ask Toby. And Toby always helps her to make things right. She is as happy as can be, and Sir Topham Hatt thinks her really useful indeed.